Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, Senior Writing Coach for Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 29, What are Writing Habits? This week is also going to have slides that go along with what I'm going to talk about today, but the slides are not necessary for audio listeners. I just have two that I'm going to share, but if you'd like to see them, you can find our slides and all of the show notes at defendandpublish.com if you click the podcast button in the upper right-hand corner. So let me go ahead and share these just because a little visual helps for any of our YouTube watchers. All right, so as I mentioned, there are just two. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our topic this week because writing habits is a large topic, and there's quite a bit going on when we're talking about something called a writing habit. So one of the things that I want to do is sort of break down the different parts of writing habits. I think one of the things that happens with academic productivity particularly is that writing habits becomes this very narrow way of thinking about writing. So some people take it to mean you might have a habit where you write at a certain time every day, or you always use a laptop instead of a yellow legal notepad or something like that. But writing habits really encompasses lots of other tasks that go along with those very, simple behaviors. And so I have been doing a little bit of research on what makes up writing habits to think about this in a more complex way. One of the reasons why I feel like academic writers get stopped is because they only work on one aspect of the problem, but not all of the other areas that might be affecting why someone has writer's block or why somebody hates to write and doesn't find academic writing satisfying. So the four areas that I think intersect that make up a set of writing habits could include something like systems. And I think that's one we're all probably familiar with. So that might be the places and the times that you write, any rituals you have with writing. I know in our podcast episode on making writing an event, I'll link to the episode in the show notes. In that one, I talk about my ritual where I try to get a good cup of coffee. I go to the library and then I go find a spot in the library and then I go and write. And that's what I've managed to do as a ritual to click into my writing process. And I've also talked about in other episodes how I've replicated that during the pandemic, where I had to kind of replicate that scenario in my dining room. And I've also replicated it at, say, the car dealership when I'm getting my car repaired. I'll go get my cup of coffee before I go get my car repaired and make sure I have a nice charged laptop. I've got the Wi-Fi password, so I can go ahead and do some work in there. So systems is certainly one part of writing habits. A second part, and I know I've spent podcast episodes 26 and 27 were all about writing literature reviews. Reading scholarly literature is really the second part of your academic writing habit, because almost always the types of writing that we need to do need to have some portion of a literature review, or they need to have some academic, some research background. And so reading scholarly literature, there's been, I think, quite a bit of a debate about is reading part of the academic writing process or not? And there's actually been an article about this that I will link to in the show notes. I believe it was from Inside Higher Ed. And it was talking about how academic reading shouldn't be part of writing time. Writing time should be separate. And in my opinion, that's a little bit more nebulous because, as I talked about in episodes 26 and 27, sometimes you can actually use your reading process time to get some scholarly writing done. I know one example that I gave there was that if you're the type of person that reads a scholarly journal article and takes notes on that article about how it connects to your own research, lots of times those small notes can become part of your writing. I use them all the time where I copy and paste them and put them in my new writing as a way to think about a certain area of that article. So systems would be one part of writing habits. Reading the scholarly literature would be a second part. A third part would certainly be the conducting and the analyzing of your research for your academic writing. So certainly this is very field dependent, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this particular aspect. But for example, if you're doing some lab experiments, that time in the lab we're actually conducting that research and doing some analysis of that research. this could take all kinds of forms. Many of us are using different computer programs to do analysis. Others of us are doing something that's a little bit more nuanced. Some of that research might be computer-based, where you're actually doing the analysis. Some of it may not, where you're actually, say, mapping out codes for coding data on a big whiteboard. There's lots of different ways that this might happen, but certainly that research process affects our writing process to some extent, because it does affect how, say, our methodology is written up or how our methodology is represented visually. So certainly that's a part of writing habits. And then that part also seems to be separated from writing. So I know that there have been several books out there about sort of writing up your data and about things like that. And one of the things was saying writing up your data is really part of the writing process, is that while that may be true, you might also be doing some writing during your data collection. Another example might be, let's say you're doing interviews and you're conducting interviews. You may be taking some notes alongside those interviews that will eventually work themselves into your draft. So that might be another part where that's part of your overall writing habit. And then the last part is certainly writing and what actually happens during that process. I recently wrote an article for Inside Higher Ed about what faculty do during a writing session. And that's something that I'll work on in another podcast episode, probably the next one coming up. I'll talk through a couple of those things. But one of the things that happens with that writing, or your writing habit, if we're thinking about the actual writing part of your overall writing habit, not all of us are doing the same thing. There might be many tasks in there. It might be, certainly some revision. It might be some editing, but it could be something where maybe you're shifting between handwritten notes, audio notes, typing your notes. Just the way of capturing the writing might even be different. So the reason I'm talking about these four things is that I want to consider what those four things are doing for your writing process. You may have a perfectly wonderful system where you're sitting down, wherever it is that you're going to do your writing, or maybe you're standing up. Let's say you're doing it on one of those treadmill desks or something like that, but you really haven't figured out how you're going to work in your scholarly reading, or you really haven't figured out how to capture your research notes in your writing. Or you can do all those other things, but once you get to the actual writing spot, you're not totally sure what to do in a writing session. And so that brings me to the next part of what I wanted to chat about today. And one of the announcements that you may have seen on Defend and Publish is that we are going to offer a workshop on July 28th. So for those of you that are listening to this podcast far into the future, this is time sensitive, certainly. So we're recording this in July of 2021. We will be offering a workshop on July 28th from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, New York time. And one of the things that will be discussed in this workshop, and the planning aspect of it, of why you might want to go, is that we're going to work through those four things. How are you going to work all four of those things into your fall 2021 semester schedule? How do those work around teaching? How do all four of those parts work together? And this is particularly important, I think, because many of us are returning to campuses, still in COVID, certainly in the pandemic, but with a lot of our academic lives pretty changed. Many of us did not go to the physical classroom or to our physical offices at all last year. So we might be returning to those physical spaces. And I think more so than ever, this is a time to do some very strategic planning before coming in August and starting a new semester, starting in September, and not really having thought through, what am I going to do with all four of those parts? But also, what are you going to do with all four of those parts when you face a crazy situation? For example, you have a class of students that are getting COVID and you have to totally adjust your teaching on the fly. Students may need a lot more advising help or more reassurance as they return to campus. You might get sick, you might be taking care of someone. Your child's school might get shut down. That's happened to me, where things have closed for a week or two. So it just seems like now more than ever, this is a strategic time to plan what it is you're going to do and work out what is an ideal schedule going to look like, and then what is your sort of backup or your emergency schedule going to look like. So we encourage everybody to sign up. There are a couple spaces left. If you want to sign up, it's just at defendandpublish.com. If you click register, you can register there. The workshop itself is just $50, and then there's just a small processing fee of around $4. So you can get it for around just under $55. Great way to use your faculty development funds. So it's an opportunity if you want to talk more about this particular topic that's in our podcast. This is a way where you can see how to think about all of those things. And as part of the workshop, you will get several takeaway free templates that are very specific that you can modify to you to help you work through some of this, along with some other resources. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. I'm at Christine, Christine, at defendandpublish.com if you've got some questions about that. Also, for those of you that might not be able to make that time, I know we have lots of folks in the UK that listen to our podcast and follow along. If you're not able to make that time, we will offer a recording. If you register for the workshop, you just need to let me know that you need the recording versus attending the workshop live. So hopefully this gives you some food for thought, and happy writing this week.